interest here in Washington.
Now, we're watching as Congress passes yet another provision that was written by lobbyists for the biggest recipient of bailout money in the history of this country.
Well, the Senate passed a $1.1 trillion spending bill last night to keep the government running. That despite criticism, as you saw, from both Ted Cruz on the right and Elizabeth Warren on the left. And we're back now with the panel. George, it was a very unhappy Senate that was forced to work through the weekend. But finally, they were able to get together and to pass this spending bill, which will keep all the government except for the Department of Homeland Security funded through the end of September. What did we learn about the ability of this Congress to get things done?
Well, this is how you get things done. The country clamors for bipartisanship. That's what it looks like. It's not pretty, and it's long, and it's confused, and it's yet another piece of legislation we had to pass in order to find out what's in it. But this is log rolling. This is how democracy in a continental nation gets things done. People aren't going to like it. We had the politics of futile gesture has now become bipartisan. Elizabeth Warren and Ted Cruz together at last. No one knows what they were trying to accomplish, but that didn't seem to matter to them. I do think that this will change substantially. When you get the new Congress here, lame ducks who've already been repudiated leave, and you get the Republicans in charge, and we're going to see if they can implement the restoration of what they call regular order, so we don't run this government with sprawling pieces of legislation like this.
All right, we're going to get to the Republicans in a moment, but let's talk first of all about the Democrats, because that was perhaps the most interesting development this week, the split inside the Democratic Party between the left wing, as represented by people like Elizabeth Warren, and President Obama. They went up directly against him. And here was the interesting reaction when President Obama said that he was going to support the spending bill. Take a look.
I'm enormously disappointed that the White House feels that the only way they can get a bill is to go along with this.
If the president is lobbying, we do not like it, and we're saying to our members, don't be intimidated by anybody.
Julie, how concerned are White House officials to see some of these left-wing, certainly to the left, Democratic officials like Nancy Pelosi, like Elizabeth Warren, saying we're going to stand up to the president. We don't care what he says.
Yeah, it certainly wasn't preferable for the White House. I think you had two things going on here. One is that Nancy Pelosi wanted to be clear that she cannot be taken for granted. There had been an expectation all week that this legislation was going to pass in the House with Democratic votes, and this was her saying to the White House and to Harry Reid, you know, you can't just cut me out of negotiations and expect my members to line up behind this. Second, we're just entering a new phase in the relationship between Obama and Democrats. These splits within the party have existed throughout his presidency. It's just that they've been papered over to some degree because the political interests of the White House and Democrats on the Hill have aligned. That's no longer going to be the case all the time here. For Obama, he's going to have an interest in trying to strike some deals with Republicans, and a lot of Democrats are not going to want to give Republicans an opportunity to look like they can govern.
So is this the beginning of the lame duck period of the Obama presidency?
It depends on what you would categorize as a lame duck. If President Obama can make deals with Republicans and get things done on trade, tax reform perhaps, then he might actually look effective. But it certainly is a new phase in his relationship with his party.
Michael, let's talk about the split among the Republicans. And once again, we saw Ted Cruz and a few others like Mike Lee going against the party leadership in their effort to try to get a vote specifically on the issue of executive action on immigration. What does this say about Mitch McConnell, the leader's ability to control his own caucus next year when he's in the majority?
Well, I think that what you saw from both the right and the left is a bipartisan response against the way Washington, D.C. works. With all due respect to George, this is not some sort of piece of legislation where statesmen came together in bipartisan fashion and solved our country's problems. For most Americans out there, wages are stagnant, the price of housing is going up, the price of food is going up, gas, how are you going to send your kid to college? And Washington, D.C. doesn't care. And they put forth one of the worst pieces of legislation, a $1.1 trillion spending bill that has a carve-out for Blue Cross Blue Shield, has a carve-out for Wall Street, reauthorizes something called the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, which provides taxpayer-backed loans so that the Four Seasons Hotel can build a resort in Turkey. I think they can pay for that on their own. And that's what's going on. And so most Americans look at Washington and they say, this isn't a town that's broken. It's a town that is a finely tuned machine to give carve-outs to the special interests who run that town, and they're sick of it. And I think that what Ted Cruz articulated was a desire to have an honest conversation about the president's lawless policy of handing out 5 million worker permits. He exercised his prerogatives as a senator to have that debate, and that's a good thing.
Let me bring in George. George?
Well, you, like Elizabeth Warren, have lit upon the obvious with a sense of profound discovery. That is, this is how big government gets big and stays big and operates. But let's not be scandalized by this, because this is, you said this is not a bunch of statesmen getting together in a disinterested manner. The memory of man runneth not to when that happened here.
And I think what you have is, on a bipartisan fashion, the American people stepping up and saying, you know what? We get the government we deserve. We're going to hold the House responsible. We're going to hold the Senate responsible. We're going to hold the presidency responsible. And they're sick of this type of legislation. If the House had wanted to put forth a 3-month continuing resolution, they could have gotten that back. They could have waited for the reinforcements to arrive. The president said a couple of days later, Josh Earnest, that he would have signed that. We could have waited for the reinforcements to arrive. We could have had a conversation about the lawless policies of the president.
And I'm looking at this. He had this bill, a constitutional point of order, challenging the legality of the executive action on immigration. Republicans, 22 voted for, 20 voted against Cruz, so he didn't have much support in his own caucus.
Well, I think that Ted Cruz derangement syndrome seems to have set in across Washington, D.C., and a lot of people took a very bad vote. I think it's unconscionable that many Republicans voted that the president's lawless action that has absolutely no respect for the institution and the co-equal branch of government that is Congress, that they voted to let that go forward. And I'm sorry that it interfered with the fundraisers that were planned this weekend.
Juan, I want to pick up on something that George said, which is that, you know, this is messy, but we actually saw the centers of both parties, you know, had the ideological wing of the, and I'm not in any way putting it down, the ideological wing, more ideological wing of the Republican Party voting against it, and the more ideological wing of the Democratic Party voting against it. But you had the centers of both parties voting, you know what, we're not happy with a lot of this stuff, but we're going to keep the government funded. We're not going to shut down the government.
Well, and I think there is a call for bipartisanship, for statesmanship, for compromise, log rolling, deal making. And this is the group. And by the way, historically, Chris, this is what you see when you have one party in control of Capitol Hill and the other party in the White House. You get a high level of legislative production. The question is, what are you getting, and, you know, is it worthwhile? I happen to think that Elizabeth Warren is exactly on target when she says, well, you know, Dodd-Frank may have some problems, but it should have been separated out and debated.
Financial regulation.
Yeah. And that deserved a separate discussion. But you can't have it and then say, oh, the alternative is shut down the government. I think that would have had terrible repercussions. Washington is in disrepute because of its inability to function. And that would have been the ultimate expression of inability to function, that the government itself would have shut down. So there was a necessity to go forward. I must say, though, that I think that the kind of anger you saw from the Democrats this week is going to be higher and more valuable than ever come next year, because they're angry not only at the Republicans, and for, you know, the Tea Party tends to rule and set the narrative in this town, but they see Obama as complicit in saying, oh, yeah, let's try to do business with the Tea Party and the Republicans rather than take them on.
Okay, George, final question, less than a minute left. The final passage, 56 senators voted to keep the government funded. 32 Democrats, 24 Republicans. I mean, that's the making of a bipartisan governing coalition.
Yes, and Americans who are clamoring for bipartisanship are going to get a good look at it and recoil in horror probably, but that's just the nature of democracy. The transaction costs of democracy are large, wasteful, messy, but it's our system.
So do you think that we're going to see some bipartisan compromises, actual legislation, business getting done in Washington?
I do. I think because the most important committee, the Ways and Means Committee, is in the hands of a grown-up Paul Ryan, and I think he will move it forward.
Thank you, panel. See you next Sunday. Up next, our Power Player of the Week.